as I prepare to close out 2017, I thought it would be appropriate for my final Star Wars book review of the year to be a series of books that closed out a specific era in Star Wars. That would be the Hand of Thrawn duology. We've got Specters of the Past and Vision of the Future. The Hand of Thrawn duology, written by Timothy Zahn, the man who originally gave us Grand Admiral Thrawn in the first place. And these are significant chapters in Star Wars lore for the expanded universe. They were the end of the main conflict of Star Wars, the Rebellion, now the New Republic by this point in the timeline, and what was once the Galactic Empire. That conflict is officially resolved by the end of this story, and the slate is completely wiped clean, as one would say. And it would kind of force writers in the future to come up with something different. But the Hand of Thrawn duology was also significant from a publishing standpoint. This was also the end of the Bantam publishing era for Star Wars. Bantam was responsible for publishing most of the books, or all the books, in the 90s. Like, from the Thrawn trilogy all the way to this. That was really the Bantam publishing era. Anything before that was... I forget what they were called. It was what ultimately became Del Rey Publishing. I don't remember what their original name was, but they were responsible for the original movie novelizations and Splinter of the Mind's Eye and anything else that came out during that time period. And then starting with 2000 or late 99, Del Rey Publishing would take over again, and they held it all the way until Disney bought it. Now I think the books are released by Penguin Publishing. I don't know who releases them now, but it's... Yeah, the Hand of Thrawn represented the end of an era and was a closure point in this part of the Star Wars canon. Now, what did I think of the books? I think there's a lot of really good ideas in them. Timothy Zahn is obviously my favorite Star Wars writer. He's written several books that I really enjoyed. Most of them I hope to review at some point. Unfortunately, I feel like these two books could have easily been condensed into one, and there's a lot of stalling and padding, and thank God they didn't break it out into a trilogy, but there was a lot of that going on in the expanded universe where they would try to make it a trilogy when there's not really enough material to make it a trilogy, and one book would have more than sufficed. But yeah, there's a lot of good ideas in there, but there's also a lot of padding. Unfortunately, most of that padding is in the first book, where the entire book almost feels like just set up for the closure in Vision of the Future. The entire first book, I feel like you could condense that down into 50 pages and then just tack it on to Visions of the Future and then maybe trim a little bit more out of that one, and then you're done. I think this would have been a really great single entry and closure point that they stretched out for 2 books for some reason. But again, fortunately, we didn't get a trilogy out of it. They at least stopped at 2. But what is the Hand of Thrawn about? Well, it's the last gasp of the Empire. You have several within the Empire, most notably Admiral Pelion, who was once the subordinate to Grand Admiral Thrawn, the Watson to his Holmes, if you will, which Timothy Zahn has made that comparison in the past. But he's having peace talks with Princess Leia Organa to ultimately cease fire, stop the war, stop everything, and just accept the New Republic as the formal government. There are others within the Imperial forces who feel that they need to unify once again, to try and take as many of their resources as possible and unify and just continue to fight on against the New Republic. And their big idea is to basically fake the return of Grand Admiral Thrawn, which isn't a surprise. It's not like they act like he's really alive and then twist you at the end where it's like, nope, no, he's not, it was a fake. They pretty much tell you right off the bat that their plan is to just prop up this phony Thrawn to trick people into thinking that he's back, unify the Imperial forces, and also scare the New Republic into thinking, oh god, one of our greatest enemies has returned. I think that's a very interesting plan. It's kind of it's actually somewhat similar to one of the ideas I had for Supreme Leader Snoke in the sequel trilogy, but I don't want to get into Last Jedi spoilers in case you're one of the 5 people who hasn't seen that movie yet. But I thought it was a very interesting idea and a very nice, last gasp kind of plan. And Grand Admiral Thrawn, I mean, he really was the greatest villain in printed Star Wars media. So bringing him back, even though they're not really bringing him back and the guy playing him is an imposter, it's still kind of like, it speaks volumes for the impact that Thrawn had, that a phony of him could kind of motivate the Republic into acting. And it's like, oh god, we gotta nip this one in the bud. We can't deal with Thrawn again. So I like that plan. There's also some unrest going on in the Republic where there's a conflict between two alien races, one of them the Bothans, and there's evidence that the Bothans helped the Emperor nearly drive this other alien race into near extinction. And this conflict is causing unrest in the Republic and just causing more division, causing more problems, and gives the Imperials more of an advantage. And this is where the book kind of veers away from me. So you have most of the main characters. You have Han and Lando. You have Talon Karrde and C-3PO, which is actually an interesting pairing, where C-3PO is kind of off on his own, away from the other main characters, and paired off with an EU creation. I was like, that's an interesting pairing right there. And you get to see 3PO kind of use his protocol to fit in with Talon Karrde and his people. That's, again, an interesting mix. But you've got all these different guys, and Wedge Antilles is off doing his own thing, and they're looking for this document that will prove, that will exonerate the Bothans, basically, and prove that this conflict is based on nothing, and they can go on being peaceful. And the Empire is trying to make sure they don't get a hold of that document because they want serious unrest in the Republic. I don't know why you need to have like 3 or 4 or 5 different subplots looking for this document. You've got Han and Lando off on their thing. You've got Karrde and 3PO off on their thing. And it just feels like you're spreading it too thin just to create more B-plots. And it doesn't really... to me, you only need like one group to go look for it. And I understand it makes sense. It's like, all right, this is this document that we don't know how to find, so it makes sense to like split up. But from a narrative perspective, it just seems weird that so many people are looking for this one document. And it takes a lot of focus away from the idea that Thrawn's back. And that's unfortunate. And that's where a lot of the padding comes in, I feel. It's like there's so much looking for this document, looking for this document, looking for this document. And not enough of, like, we got to deal with Thrawn. And that takes up a lot of the load in the first book. Now, things, like I said, get better in the second book, most notably because the best part of these books and the heart and soul of the whole thing is the Luke and Mara Jade pairing, where they are once again stuck together on a planet looking for what they ultimately discover to be the Hand of Thrawn, which is a giant fortress that Thrawn had used as basically a stockpile for weapons and materials and tools of war, basically. And just some big old secret that Thrawn was hiding away. And it's like, even after death, he's still enacting plans to take down the Republic. But so they're stuck on this planet with them and a bunch of pterodactyl-like creatures that communicate through the Force. Very interesting alien race, and there's something that if Disney wants to keep borrowing elements from the expanded universe and the Legends timeline and put them in the movies, I think these creatures, actually that's probably what the Porg should have been. These like small creatures that communicate with Force users, and you can talk to them, and it's like Mara and Luke are able to learn about their culture and also get them to help them out in this mission that they have. It's them and R2 and these like small little pterodactyl Force creatures that are... It's a very interesting alien race and a very neat idea, and something that I wouldn't mind seeing coming back. Like I said, it's probably what the Porg should have been, but which would make sense if they're on the island where the first Jedi Temple was. They would be flocking to where the Force is super strong and everything. But anyway, enough Last Jedi talk. The Luke and Mara Jade stuff is excellent because they strengthen their bond as characters. They deal with their own personal issues, Mara being willing to open up to Luke, and Luke dealing with his failures. Luke had closed himself off from the Force. Gee, does that sound familiar? And he felt that he was a bad teacher, and again, does that sound familiar? And that question his abilities in the Force. And Mara Jade kind of had to talk him out of it. It's like, no, there's value to what you do, and you are valuable and everything, and yada, 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 all that stuff. And ultimately, they become closer as characters, become romantically linked, and the book actually ends as they're caught in a death trap. Luke proposes to Mara Jade, and of course they get out of the death trap and wind up getting married, which is, isn't that sweet? The second best Star Wars couple behind Han and Leia. Luke and Mara Jade, and they had tried quite a few times to give Luke a girlfriend or a love interest. Trusit Bakura did that. There was the Kalista trilogy, which God knows I've said enough about that. Go see my review. Do not read those books. For the love of God, don't. And they always seemed to fail whenever they tried. Dark Empire was another one. Dark Empire 2 gave him a love interest that added nothing. And the problem was, I felt like a lot of the writers felt like they wanted to give Luke a love interest after obviously things didn't work out with Leia for obvious reasons. They wanted to give Luke a love interest. They were more concerned about giving him a love interest than they were about making said love interest an interesting character. It's like they just wanted Luke to fall in love. They didn't really care how interesting the character was. Or they didn't... the character that they created for that role didn't work. Mara Jade, who had been there from the start of the Thrawn trilogy, was an interesting character whether she hooked up with Luke or not. Princess Leia and Han Solo are great characters whether they become romantically linked or not. And that's a great character first, then you can do the shipping bullshit. And hopefully don't screw it up like Arrow did with Felicity and Oliver. But anyway, Mara Jade was such a great character and such like this sarcastic, confident kind of counterbalance to Luke's kind of idealism. That, you know, you can kind of see them working out. Like, even as way back as the Thrawn trilogy, you can kind of see them making a nice couple, but they didn't go that route, and they waited and they waited and they waited up until Hand of Thrawn to finally pull the trigger out. They'd actually teased throughout the books that Mara Jade was romantically linked with Lando Calrissian because she had formed a business relationship with him and was hanging around with him a lot. Turns out that, according to Mara, that was not the case. Yeah, I think the interactions between Luke and Mara and just a final payoff to them finally getting together, as like, isn't that sweet? I think gives the book enough to work, even though it does have problems, like I said, with it being overly padded and overly stuffed, and it could afford to be shorter. Actually, if it had just been Luke and Mara going into the Hand of Thrawn and they didn't do any of the document hunt stuff, I probably would have liked it even more. Just keep it focused on them the entire time. Yeah, it's actually funny. They actually, typically with these trilogies, they try and split up the cast and come up with, like, whatever pairings they want, and try and make sure that everybody is doing something. In this one, it's, they got Han and Lando off doing something, you got Leia off doing something, 3PO off doing something, Chewbacca's off babysitting the Solo kids, and he's not even in this. He's written out almost from the start. And then you got Luke and Mara doing their own thing, and I kind of look at it and go, if you just shorten it to just Luke and Mara, if it were a movie, I could understand it, but in a book, it's like, it's just focus on Luke and Mara, you'd be fine. And I think their whole journey and all the interactions they have with the little creatures and the how they become spiritually stronger and how their relationship becomes stronger as a result. The hunt for the Hand of Thrawn and all the stuff surrounding them, I think, is great. And makes the books worth reading. I think the second book is much stronger, mainly because that's where all the Luke Mara stuff is. I think there's some good stuff in the book. I love Pelion in the book, where he's kind of the guy that's been beaten to submission, and he kind of realizes that it's like, what do you mean Thrawn's back? I know about Thrawn. It's like, this, you're lying. You have to be. And so Pelion gets to shine a little bit on his side of things. And there is something satisfying about the Rebellion/New Republic, Imperial/Galactic Empire conflict finally getting closure. Because, there's this hesitation in Star Wars to try anything new or to take the galaxy in a new direction, because it's like, you can't just have the same two factions fighting each other forever. J.J. Abrams, I'm looking at you. It's like, guys, something new has got to happen. And this represented a closure point and gave future writers the ability to move forward. But as far as the timeline goes, I mean, this is as late as the timeline goes. This was the end of the Star Wars timeline of the expanded universe. Nothing else ever happened after this. Nothing else ever happened. There was absolutely nothing that took place after the events of the Hand of Thrawn duology. The Hand of Thrawn duology was the end of everything, and there was never anything that happened after the Hand of Thrawn. Once the Rebellion / Republic Imperial Galactic Empire series of conflicts was over, there were no more stories left to tell. The timeline was completely done. There was absolutely nothing to do, and I guess I could just wrap up my Star Wars reviews now, because there is absolutely nothing to cover past the Hand of Thrawn duology. It's all over from here. There's nothing left to cover. This is the next review.